Hello everybody. Today we're going to build pivot tables. From here, we will be able, once we have a pivot table, be able to build a bar chart, a pie chart, and other graphical devices. But first, let's just work with pivot tables. So how does one get a pivot table? Well, let me start out with, I'm using Office 365. If you're using an earlier edition, this might be different. So you got the home menu and you got the insert menu. On the insert tab, you'll see pivot table right away. So I click on it. Now, if you have really not touched your data and it's very clean like this, it should highlight all the data for you right away. It should say data, which is the tab, and it should say A1, in my case, to O112, which is all the data I have, 112 elements. And so it is all highlighted. If it is not highlighted here, you'll have to highlight it yourself. I like to use the new worksheet. I like to keep it on a clean new worksheet. And so really, I don't change anything on this menu unless I need it to really highlight the data. Even if I'm using a small portion of the data, I usually bring over the full data because who knows what I need it for later. So we click OK. All right, in here, I like to title pivot. Once I'm in the pivot table, I do like to call pivot. So if I'm working somewhere else, I can go back to the pivot table and work with it. At the plus symbol, I'm also going to title this answers. So once I've built the pivot I like, I'm going to copy and put it into my answers tab. So the plus symbol, you can keep adding tabs and changing their names as you'd like. So back to the pivot. Notice something disappeared. That's fine. We're in the cells of the pivot table. This is the actual pivot table. Click on the pivot table and up comes the pivot table fields. So let's start out really simple. Let's say I want to know in my study how many males and females do I have? Well, there it is, gender. I grab it, bring it down to rows, and you can see I have the startings of a nice pivot table. I have the columns of females and males. And what I would like next is to count. So let me click back on because I clicked off, as you noticed, for a few seconds. And whatever I usually put in the rows, the way I usually do it, unless it's a very special case, I put it into the summation. This fancy sigma, Greek letter sigma, says to add the values up. So I wanted to add up the gender values in there as counting out the genders one by one. And so what I have is a nice pivot table of that exercise. Now you might be saying, well, wait a minute, I didn't want them as a row. No big deal. Put it over here, and you now have it as a column chart. Your choice. Prefer to me the rows. All right. Once your pivot table is nice, I like to copy and paste it over to an answers tab. That's just the way I work. And I did something wrong. When you do something wrong, no big deal, people. Use your undo arrow. I meant to paste it as 1, 2, 3. Paste it as values. The reason why I paste it as values is because I like to have complete control over my design of the pivot table in the answers. Let me get out of here because I'm playing around with it. I don't need to. So what I have here is I clearly have the gender column and I have the count column. And since we're doing a pivot table, maybe I would like to have a percentage column at the same time. Well, given the fact that I have the gender and the count, and you can check to make sure there's 111 people in your survey. That's what you should do. Check to make sure there is 111 people in your survey, and there is. Once we have that, making percentages is no big deal. To get a formula in Excel, you start with equals. This will allow you to write a formula. Since I'm using the count of the female, because I like to know percent of females, I'm going to use the count of females. I could type in 55, but I want to write a formula. So 55, or that cell, divided by the grand total, because that's really what percentage is success over total. And we get 49.5%. Yes, it's as a decimal, and we'll fix that. Now this one, I'm going to do the same thing. Male divided by total. And I get a whopping 50%. Now to check to see if I've done this right, I can run a check. I like to run the check. To run a check, you would add them up. So I'm going to use the sum command. The sum command, you open the parentheses in the sum command, and you highlight what you want to add up, and then close the parentheses. For every open parentheses, you should close it, and you get 1, which makes sense because if you have all the data, it should add up to 100%. Now, yes, these are not in percent form. So we highlight the data. And on the home menu, please get used to the home menu, okay, guys? On the home menu, there's a percent button right in the middle. Change it to a percent. Nice. If you notice, we lost all accuracy though. It's saying 50-50, and it is roughly 50-50. Over here, right next to the percent, you can add more decimals or take decimals away. This seems close enough. And there we go. From here, we would build our charts, our bar charts, our pie charts, our column charts. In a future video, I'll show you how to do that. Once you get the pivot table, the graphs can be displayed nicely and easily. Let's do another pivot table, shall we? So, all right, we're back to the pivot. Notice what I did. Answers, got the cleaned up version. And in fact, I went a little too fast. I like to box in. And so again, I'm on the home menu, borders, and I like to do all borders, and I have this all bordered in. Also, I like to, my titles, bold them. Now, this is just me as a professor. You could do what you like. There's so many cool things you could do. You're like, oh, I want to highlight the background in yellow. You can do that. Or you can have no color. Your choice. There's a lot of design ability here. Different fonts, different things. Please take a moment. For example, maybe you want everything centered because you're afraid you might get cut off by a bar if you're too close to things. There's so many ways you can format the pivot table. Just have fun and experiment. All right, back to the pivot. On the pivot, over here, I've done gender. Now, what would be cool, now this survey also has data about majors. I would love to know gender versus major. Is there a big discrepancy? Right now, I can see my survey, I have roughly 50% male, 50% female in my classes. I like to now check out the major. So the cool thing, all I got to do is drop it down into the columns, and it creates this nice modified advanced pivot table of column versus rows. Now, as a professor, I like to have more rows than columns. It just looks cleaner. So, but before I go too fast, I'm going to move my major down underneath gender. And notice what it did. It actually took my gender, the top, and broke it down by major, in case that's what you're looking for. It all depends on what type of chart you're looking for your PowerPoint. This is a beautiful chart right here. You got your gender broken down by major and the subcounts. So that's really a cool device. That's not what I wanted. So I'm going to flip-flop columns and rows. And you see how easy, get major out of there, it's gone. Click on major, bring it back down, it's back. That's the cool thing. I can move these around, and Excel just sums these up quickly for me, giving me a really nice pivot table. Please keep in mind, every now and then something happens over here, and this may not say count. Look at your number. If it's not 111, then if your data is not 111, then your data is not wrong. It's potentially over here is the issue. For example, every now and let me get out of there. Well, got to bring it back down now because I removed it. And since I removed it, I like to do whatever's in the row. Remember what I said earlier, whatever's in the row, I like to bring here. You'll notice there's no difference whether you use gender or row in sum when it's a 2x2. It's when you start filtering and have sub rows or sub columns, you got to be careful. So back on track. Look at value field settings here. If I change it to sum, look what happens. I get a sum of female, sum of male. First of all, it doesn't understand how to sum them. What do you mean by sum? What's two females equal? What's three males equal? It doesn't understand that, so it can't sum. So that tells me something was wrong. You might be saying, "Ooh, I don't have data." Well, that's one thing. Maybe you don't have any data. But over here, quickly, I always like to make sure everything is where it should be. We're counting. When you're looking at a qualitative variable, you should be counting the data. And there we are. Now that we have my pivot table looking good, I once again copy and paste it over here. I paste again as values. And all right, clean up time. I have major. I have gender. All right, I'm going to box this in like before. Going to bold it in. And I like to center my data. And of course, I have one title that's really long, so I'm going to use that. And here's my pivot table. Of course, gender probably should be over both of these, so I highlight them. Notice on the home menu, I'm doing a lot of quick steps. So if you need to pause and review this video a couple times, please do so. Merge and center, really cool. Write what you want to have over all the columns in your leftmost box. Highlight all the boxes you want it to spread to and hit merge and center. And boom, gender is over both now. Really cool. So now I have a breakdown of major by gender and the grand total still. So I can see there's still 15 accountant totals. There is 26 economics finance totals. And I can see the breakdown and I can look at the counts and go, wow, IS, all right, has three each, pretty even. 8 and 7, pretty even. Well, I mean, we had 55 and 56. So there's not much difference except for, wow, that's something to maybe look at. Marketing. Why are there more females in marketing than males? That's interesting. Why, potentially, is there more males in econ and finance than females? Something to think about. That's where the data is leading us. Something to think about. Back to the pivot table just for one more moment. So the pivot table is a really cool way of collecting data. Let me get rid of everything here. Please understand, you should use the pivot table for qualitative variables. I didn't say that at the beginning. Now I want to say that. Pivot tables are needed for qualitative variables. If you take a quantitative variable, let's just see what happens into rows. What it's going to do is going to assume that you meant it to be a qualitative breakdown. That age, we're actually looking at age brackets, the age bracket of 18. So you be 18 in 2 months, 18 in 3 months, that kind of thing. So it's looking at age brackets, not really looking at age as a quantitative variable. And in fact, if you want to keep going down this rabbit path and do what I've said before, whatever I have in the rows, put in the sums, notice what you get. First of all, a grand total of 2439. We already know that it's 111, not 2439. We've done some beautiful pivot tables where it's 111. What is going wrong? Well, if you look over here, it changed to sum, which it makes sense because it's a quantitative variable. It changed to sum. We could go to count if you like, and value few settings, change it to count, and now it's back to 111. And so there are 14 18-year-olds, 10 19-year-olds, 17 20-year-olds. So if that's the pivot table you wanted, there you go. You could use age as sort of a bucket, a qualitative. I usually do pivot tables when it comes to qualitative data. If I have quantitative data, then I go to histograms or box plots, which will happen in my future videos. But right now we're looking at pivot tables. Pivot tables are really good for qualitative data. Age is more of a quantitative. But if you really wanted to use them as buckets, how many 18-year-olds do I have? 4. How many 19-year-olds do I have? 10. You have it. And you can, again, once you have what you're looking for, copy, paste it to answers. 1, 2, 3, please. So this would be age, and this would be count. And you have a nice little pivot table of age versus count for your study. Of course, each one of these probably should have a nice title over what you're studying and everything. These are just kind of beginner pivot tables to get you started along the path of building pivot tables. Always consult your professor to figure out exactly what they should look like and what titles you should have. I thank you for watching this video. Please look at future videos for enhanced pivot tables and bar charts and pie charts. Thank you.